last week we spoke about the fundamentals of mitzvahs tkiyas shofar, and tonight we will be discussing a question, probably a question that is dealt with in every shul, every shtibel, every besmedish, every yeshiva in the world. Are you allowed to eat before tkiyas shofar? So, most shuls have a kiddush before tkiyas shofar, not all of them. So what's the story about eating before tkiyas shofar? Fundamentally, you're not allowed to eat before performing any mitzvah, whether it's a mitzvah d'oraisa or a mitzvah d'rabbanan. When the time of the mitzvah comes, you cannot eat before being mekayim the mitzvah. Even before the time comes, within a half hour of Zman Tefillah. And the source of this halacha is a Mishnah in Shabbos Daf Tesomit Beis. Lo yeshev odem lefnei hasapar, v'lo lemerchetz, v'lo lebursiki, v'lo yercha, v'lo ledin. You cannot engage in any serious activity when a mitzvah arrives before you perform the mitzvah. And these halachas are brought in various different sources of Shulchan Aruch. Reish Lamed Beis Siv Beis before minhag. Reish Lamed Hey Siv Beis before Kriyas Shema Shel Arvis. Whether it's mincha or marev. When the time for tefillah comes, you cannot sit down to have a meal. And it is not only a din in Hilchas Tefillah. Siman Tov Lamed Aleph in Hilchas Pesach, before B'dikas Chometz, you cannot sit down to eat. And the reason of all these halachas, Rashi writes in the Mishnah Masechet Shabbos, Shemi Yishkach. He might get so engaged with his food and he'll forget to daven, he'll forget to perform the mitzvahs. So I quoted B'dikas Chometz Tov Lamed Aleph, Tov Reish Nun Beis, Lulav. When the time comes to perform, to be Makayim Mitzvahs Lulav, you cannot eat. Tov Reish Tzadik Beis, in the Ramah, not in the Mechaber, regarding Megillah. And the halacha that we learn in Tov Reish Tzadik Beis is not Nogea in Yerushalayim, but anywhere else in the world. Mikra Megillah is right after Tanis Esther. And the halacha is, when a person doesn't feel well, he's ill, he's limited, and he's at home, he needs to wait till after the tzayim, till people come home from the Megillah in shul, and they will read the Megillah for him. And the Ramah says, he cannot eat before reading the Megillah, afal pisha tanis koshaloi. It's after a long fast day, and he cannot eat before hearing the Megillah. So we find this halacha in so many different mitzvahs. Megillah, lulav, b'dikas chometz, mincha, marev. What about Ner Chanukah? Tov Reish Ayin Beis. It's not the Shulchan Aruch, but the Magen Avraham writes, you cannot eat before kiyum mitzvahs Ner Chanukah. Kaf HaChaim Tov Kuf Pei Hey in Hilchas Shofar wonders, why don't we find this halacha regarding shofar? It's not in the Torah, it's not in the Shulchan Aruch, which seems to prove that this Isser wouldn't apply to shofar, and before shofar one could eat. But he doesn't suggest why would shofar be different than all the other mitzvahs. Why? What would be the rationale? His Oireles Tshuva is a Tshuva Sefer from Reb Shimon Sofer. The well-known Reb Shimon Sofer was a son of the Chasam Sofer, and he was the Rav in Krakow in Poland. But that's not the one. The Chasam Sofer's son, Reb Shimon, also wrote a Shalosh Tshuvas Michtav Sofer. His Oireles Tshuva that I am quoting is an enikel of the Chasam Sofer. It was the Ksav Sofer's son. His name was also Shimon. Siman Shin Ayin Daled in his Sefer, he deals with the same question. So, whenever I quote the Sefer, Oireles Tshuva, I say, I disagree with every page in this Sefer. And people wonder, so why would you quote him if you disagree with every page? Is there an other Sefer in which you have such a negative opinion about? Is there any other Sefer you disagree with every page? So let me explain. Reb Shimon Sofer was an unbelievable Yirei Shemayim and Yirei Chet. And I'm not aware of any other Mechaber. At the bottom of every page, in Shalosh Tshuva, Oireles Tshuva, it is written, Ein lismar chaloch al ha'maisa al ma shekosav b'sefer zeh. And that is why I disagree with every page. I disagree with one line on every page, not all the rest. And I disagree because he was a real gadol and he writes beautiful tshuvas, and you definitely could rely on what he says. And he was such a Yerei Shamayim. He could have written that in the introduction to the Sefer, but he was afraid a person might overlook the introduction, and chas v'sholem, he will be soymech on what's written in the Sefer. So he wrote at the bottom of every page, one cannot rely halacha l'maisa on what is written in the Sefer, and I definitely disagree. So Reb Shimon Sofer has the same comment as the Kaf HaChaim. Why is this halacha not in Shas, not in the Poskim? And he does suggest a reason why this halacha doesn't apply to Tkiyas Shofar. And his reason is this. Reish Ayin Hei Sif Ches in Shulchan Aruch. Reish Ayin Hei we learn the din, Ein Koren Yorener. You cannot read to candlelight on Shabbos. Going back to the days of Chazal, they had no lead, they had no electricity. It was only candlelight. And you cannot read Shabbos by candlelight, Shemiyata and Saner. You know, maybe the light wouldn't be sufficient, and it'll play around with a wick. So, Ein Koirem La'oiraner. And a Sifches, Shulchan Aruch says, the minhag Yom Kippur is, we daven from Achzerim La'oiraner, Mishum Eimas Yoim Hadin, we're not Choishish Shemiyata. How would a person forget and be nichshel ba'avera? Yom Kippur, Eimas Yoim Hadin, we're not Choishish Shemiyata. So Reb Shimon Sofer suggests, maybe the same would apply to Rosh Hashanah. Mishum Eimas Yoim Hadin, we're not afraid Shem Yishkach. And therefore the halacha doesn't apply to Tkiyas Shofar. And I think that's a very shvacha svara, a very weak svara. This etzem chiddush is a very far-fetched halacha. Yom Kippurim mishum eimas hamedin, we're not afraid shemiyata, but a person might forget. Siv Ches is based on Sivav. Sivav is a Mishnah in Shabbos Daf Yud Aleph. And the explanation of the mitzvah is in Shabbos Yud Gimel Omad Aleph and the Gemara. Tinoike shel Beis Rabbam do read La'oir Haner. And why is that? Eimas Rabbam. Kids in Cheder are afraid to stretch out their hand. They're afraid of the Rebbe. Well, maybe once upon a time, kids were afraid of their Rebbe. Today, not so much. And Baruch Hashem, kids today are not so afraid of the Rebbe. When I was a kid, yes, I was afraid of my Rebbe because he had a big stick and he liked to hit children. So Baruch Hashem, kids today are not so afraid. So maybe today, this halacha wouldn't apply. The Tanoike Shebesaba Mishum Eimas Rabban. However, when I think of it, when it comes to playing with fire, I hope kids are afraid of their Rebbe. Because, you know, when you put kids together with fire, that's a tremendous sakon, Hashem Yerachem. So anyway, so the Gemara says, Tenoike Shebesaba Mishum Eimas Rabban, there's no Chashash Shemiyata. The Beis quotes Sefer Atimus, who compares Eimas Yomedin to Eimas Rabban, which is a far stretch. By nature, it's different. Eimas Rabban, kids are afraid to move because the Rebbe is standing there. Eimas Yomedin is something different. You know, people just might forget. So this halacha is a chiddush, and I say, Enecho be'elech chidushay. We can't compare Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur for a very simple reason. So why doesn't the Shulchan Aruch say that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the minhag is to read to daven la'or haner? Shulchan Aruch says only Yom Kippur. If the same Eimis Yom Hadin would apply to Rosh Hashanah, I would expect the Shulchan Aruch to say the minhag is Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we do daven la'or haner. Rosh Hashanah is not there, only Yom Kippur. So obviously, Rosh Hashanah is not like Yom Kippur. And maybe the Chashash Shemiyishkach is not the same as the Chashash Shemiyata. So I don't think this is a very convincing Savora. But the basic argument, why is it in Shulchan Aruch? I think that's mufrach. I think that's a mistake. Chazon Ish writes, at the end of Chazon Ish Taharos, I wonder whether we have a Chazon Ish in this shul. A shul should have a Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish at the end of Taharas, Amud Reish Chet Tzadik, Chazon Ish writes, we can never derive a halacha from what is not written, only from what is written. And the two under Shulchan Aruch never intended to teach us anything by what they omit. Dailon, we should learn what they express and not what they omit. And that's a klal that the Chazon Ish writes. We cannot derive a rucha from what is not written. However, there's a famous story told about Reb Chaim, which seems to contradict what the Chazon Ish's feeling was. So the story is, a person probably living in Brisk once came to Reb Chaim. He wants to call the Chaver Kedisha to a din Torah. And Reb Chaim asked, what happened? And he said, my father passed away very early in the morning, and for some reason the Chaver Kedisha buried another person that passed away later. And they neglected my father, so I want to call them to the Torah. Reb Chaim was shocked, takes out a Rambam, Hilchas Ovel. He looks in the Rambam a few minutes, and he responds, and he says, they did something very wrong, but you have no complaint. And the person was baffled. If they did something wrong, why don't I have a complaint? He didn't understand. He came back to Reb Chaim, and he said, Rebbe, could you please explain what you said? And I looked at the same Rambam you looked at, and I saw nothing in the Rambam. So what did you see in the Rambam that brought you to that conclusion? So Reb Chaim explained. It's a sif in Shulchan Aruch that you need to bury people if you say the ptirosam. First to pass away is first to be brought to kvura. So they did something wrong. Yesh lehistapek. One could question, what is the rationale of this halacha? Is it kvoid hameis, or is it din kadima b'mitzvahs? Maybe it's a general rule in mitzvahs, in every mitzvah. First to come, first to go. First to come is first to be performed. And that was my suffix. I reckoned, explained Reb Chaim, if it's a din kvoid hameis, it should be in Hilchas Avelis, in Rambam, together with all the other halachas of kvura. I saw nothing in the Rambam. So I concluded, has nothing to do with Dina Kavura, has nothing to do with Koyd HaMes. It's a Din Kadima B'mitzvahs. And therefore I said, they were wrong. Their mitzvah is to bury the Mesim Lefi Seder P'tirosam. But you have no complaint. It's nothing to do with your mitzvah, it has nothing to do with Koyd HaMes. So Reb Chaim derived the halacha from what is not written, and not only what is written. And there's some seifers, and the Chazon Ish says, no. They never intended to teach us by what they do not write. This is a far broader discussion in Hashkafas Halacha, or the philosophy of Halacha, as one might phrase it. And, I want to focus on the topic we're discussing. I'm just mentioning an interesting, fundamental question, B'darkei Apsak. And there are a lot of delicate nuances in this sugya, which maybe we'll discuss at another opportunity. So, the Kaf Chaim, Reb Shimon Sofer say, we do not find this halacha in Shulchan Aruch and other poskim. We do. It's in the Rishonim, Sukkah Lamed Ches. Sukkah Lamed Ches, the Gemara says, one is not entitled to eat before performing a mitzvah. Imit chilu, but if it did sit down to a meal, if it's a mitzvah d'oraisa mafsiken, it's a mitzvah d'rabbanon ein mafsiken. That's the sugi in Sukkah Lamed Ches Amud Aleph. Both the Ra'ah and the Ra'ah's great Talmud, the Ritva was a Talmud of the Ra'ah, Chidush HaRitva and Chidush HaRa'ah in Sukkah Lamed Ches Amud Beis, Lamed Ches Amud Aleph, both say that this halacha applies to any mitzvah. By mitzvahs that rabbanan ein mafsikin, by mitzvah d'oraisa kemo lula v'shofar imet chilu mafsikin. Both the Ritva and the Ra'ah speak about shofar. What is far more important is it's a tosefta mefurash, Shabbos Perek Aleph Zayin. On that very same Mishnah, the tosefta goes all the way back to the days of the Tanoim. And the tosefta says, from this Mishnah we learn that before performing any mitzvah, you're not allowed to engage in other activities, and you're not allowed to eat. V'chein, the Mishnah deals with mincha and marav. V'chein belula v'shoifa v'kol ha-mitzvahs. So the Tosefta speaks about shofar. And what is even more important, the Tosefta is quoted and brought down by the Magen Avraham and Tofreish Tzadik Beis. So that's the Magen Avraham. If the argument is, why is it not in the Shulchan Aruch? Chanukah is not in the Shulchan Aruch either. Chanukah is the Magen Avraham Tofreish Ayin Beis. Shofar is the Magen Avraham Tofreish Tzadik Beis. Megillah is not in the Shulchan Aruch, it's in the Ramah. So Mincha Marav, Lulav B'dikas Chometz is the Shulchan Aruch. Megillah is the Ramah. Chanukah is Magen Avraham, so is Shofar. So we find this, then you cannot eat before Shofar in the Rab, or in the Rit. For Magen Avraham quoting it as Sefta. How about the other poskim? All the great poskim saw this as a halacha pshuta beyond doubt. Just like you can't eat before Lulav, before Megillah that's the Rabbanon, before B'dikas Chometz, same applies to Shofar. There's a tshuva in Chasam Sofer, Yoredei Simen Zayin. Chasam Sofer was asked, person has a chazakah to be a chazan in the shul. He's a tzaddik, everybody loves him in shul, he has a beautiful voice, but he's an epileptic, and sometimes he gets a seizure. I don't know, probably some of you saw an epileptic seizure. People don't die, but it's a very scary sight. You know, I've seen this many times, and you never get used to it. So the Chasam Sofer was asked, if he's going to have a seizure in the middle of davening, maybe it's a bezoyin for the tzibur. I have a bit of a difficulty understanding why would it be a bezoyin for the tzibur if he's a tzaddik and he's ill. And maybe he shouldn't daven because people will be so disturbed, it'll diminish their kavana. You know, you can't daven when you're frightened, when you see something so unpleasant. And he usually has these seizures when he's hungry. So the Chasam Sofer writes, what's your problem? Before shofar, te'ima is mutar. And if te'ima is not enough, then he could eat. He could eat a seudah before tkiyas shofar. He should make kiddush and he should eat. And hopefully he'll be well. And the davening will go well. So the Chasam Sofer pshitale that you can't eat before tkiyas shofar, that it's an aveda to eat before. He had no doubt about it. The Chasam Sofer was the son-in-law of the great Rabbi Akiva Eiger. There's a kuntas psukim v'takonos shel Rabbi Akiva Eiger in the time of the cholera pandemic or epidemic. Cholera was an epidemic that came back and back and back in Central and in Eastern Europe, and many Gedolim wrote shuvas. So we have takonos of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. A few years ago, we had our own pandemic, which was the COVID, the Corona pandemic, and in Minchas Osha on Corona, I quoted this kuntres many times, Rabbi Akiva Eiger's takonos. And Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, anybody that feels a need, even a slight need, should not fast. And we should make kiddush between tkiyas de meyushav and tkiyas de ma'umad. That's a kiddush. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger prefers eating between tkiyas de meyushav and tkiyas de ma'umad and not before tkiyas shofar. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But Rabbi Akiva Eiger pshitale, it's an aveda to eat before tkiyas shofar. It is only because of the epidemic and the illness, and that's why he says, you're not allowed to eat before tkiyas shofar. That is why I prefer that you eat after tkiyas de meyushav. So it's a pele b'einai. Reb Shimon Sofer was an einikel of the Chasam Sofer, a great-grandson of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. And he writes, Lo metzinu b'shas v'poiskim, there's an isur to eat before tkiyas shofar. And he suggests why there would be no isur. He wasn't familiar with his Zaydis Shuvis and with his great-grandfather's takonis in the days of pandemic. So put aside Rabbi Akiva Eiger and the Chasam Sofer, it's in the Magen Avraham, it's in the Rishonim, it's in Tosefta. Mata Ephraim. Does everybody know what the Mater Ephraim is? I'm a bit dismayed because we live in an age of abundance, and Baruch Hashem, there are so many Talmidei Chachamim, and so many Svarim are produced today, more than ever before. I get at least a shelf of new Svarim every week. Mostly Svarim that I wrote Askamas on. So there's a totally new bookcase. So Svarim that once were, everybody learned and everybody knew, today are put aside. Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolius was one of the greatest Gedolim in the days of Rabbi Akiva Eigen Lechem Sofer. He was a friend of Rabbi Akiva Eigen Lechem Sofer. What was unusual about this Gadol? He wasn't a Kli Kodesh, he was a banker, and he was a wealthy person. We know of many tremendous Talmidei Chachamim, and even Gedolei Yisrael, that were not Kli Kodesh, that preferred to live their lives like the Rambam's Psak. The Rambam says it's a Isser Gomer to be paid for learning or teaching. The Rambam says Hillel HaZoken was a Choyte Veitzim. Shammai HaZoken was a builder. Everybody disagrees with the Rambam. And the Tashbet says, well, Hillel HaZoken wasn't born Hillel HaZoken. Neither was Shammai. Probably when Hillel was the Nossi, he was no longer a wood chopper. And Shammai, when he was a young guy in Koilel, was a Benai, not when he was Shammai HaZoken. So anyway, what was unique about Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolius, he was not only a Gadol, he was one of the great poskim of his generation, together with the Chassam Sofer and Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and he wrote many Svarim. Beis Ephraim, Rosh Ephraim, Yad Ephraim, Shar Ephraim, and Kiyas HaTorah. Mat Ephraim is an amazing sefer on Chodesh Elul Tishrei. And once every Elul Chiyid came Elul, he learned Mat Ephraim. Mat Ephraim is all the details on halacha relevant Elul Tishrei. Today we have so much new literature that some people don't even know about the Mat Ephraim. Anyway, Mat Ephraim also says Pshita, also Lechol Lefnei Tkiyas Shofar. Sharet Shuva Orach Chaim. Another little piece of history. Sharet Shuva, his name was Reb Chaim Mordechai Margolius. And many times in Sharet Shuva, he writes, Besifri Yad Ephraim, Besifri Beis Ephraim, which is confusing. He was a younger brother of the Beis Ephraim. His older brother was Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolius. His name was Reb Chaim Mordechai. He passed away at a relatively young age, and his older brother printed his sefer. And because he passed away at a young age, he didn't really finalize his sefer. And his older brother, the Beis Ephraim, added in many notes and many ha'oras and many hashlomas. And that is why in Sharet Shuva and Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim sometimes we find Besifri Beis Ephraim. He didn't write the Beis Ephraim, but those are additions that his older brother put in when he edited the Sefer and prepared it for print. Sharet Shuva Tov Kuf Pei Hai, all the Achronim, mills of the Pshita, it's a prohibition to eat before Tkiyas Shofar, and Tkiyas Shofar is no different than Lulav, Bedikas, Chometz, Mikra, Megillah, or any other mitzvah. So where does the minhag come from that people eat before Tkiyas Shofar? Reish Lamed Beis Siv Gimel, the Shulchan Aruch clearly says, you're not allowed to sit down to a meal, aval te'ima muteras. What is defined as te'ima? Shulchan Aruch writes, you could eat fruits as much as you want. Pas ad kebeitza. You could wash and eat challah or bread, but only ad kebeitza. So the Shulchan Aruch clearly says te'ima muteras. I don't know anybody that washes the bread. And why would you wash if you only eat kibbutza? That's like an egg. But in most shuls, they give cake, not only fruits. You make kiddush, it needs to be kiddush mokum suda. Would fruit be defined as kiddush mokum suda is a big machlokes. What about cake? How much cake would be considered te'ima? Mishnah Brura Reish Lamed Beis quotes Derech HaChaim. Derech HaChaim is the Nesivos HaMishpat. His Sefer Piskei Halacha and Shulchan Aruch Chaim is Derech HaChaim. Both the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Brura, based on the Derech HaChaim, say you could eat fruit, you could eat cooked food, even though they contain chameshes aminim. But they don't speak about mezainis, cake. The only one that does is the Aruch HaShulchan, Siv Chavav. And the Aruch HaShulchan says, cake is like peiros, like fruit. And you could eat cake without a limit, without a shiur. It would be defined as te'ima. The Magen Avraham, Tafrei Tzadik Bey, says, only b'tzoyrech godol. And the Mishnah Brura quotes the Magen Avraham. However, Reish Lamed Beis, Reish Lamed Hey, the Shulchan Aruch and Reish Lamed Beis doesn't stipulate that it needs to be tzoyrech godol. Shulchan Aruch is mashma. The Issa doesn't apply to te'ima. The concept of te'ima is a machlokes.
It's possible to kiss them, so if it's more debate, then the same shiur would have to wash, and then you would give the same shiur as the bread.
My dear friend, Reb Moshe is your name, right? Reb Moshe's late father and my late father were very good friends going back to the yeshiva. Where was it? In Munkach? Ungvar. My father was a Ili. Evi's man he learned in a different yeshiva. So they learned together in Ungvar, and they were very, very close friends. So our relationship is the second generation. So you have, if mezonos is possible by kissing, there must be a limit. That's a raya to the minhag social. And in the second volume of my Shalas Tshuvos, I'm a big makel in Pasabo Bekisnen. And I say most cake would never be considered Pasabo Bekisnen. Pasabo Bekisnen is only cake that people might be Kaveya Suda, like mezonos rolls. But cake would never be considered Pasabo Bekisnen, regardless of how much you eat. Pasabo Bekisnen is only mezonos of a nature that people are sometimes koiveya su'udo. So most cakes wouldn't be considered. So this would prove my point that I wrote in that tshuva. So let's get back to the minhag ha'olam. There are 4 different opinions how to define te'ima. The most important opinion is the Shulchan Aruch. Te'ima is even pas. Shulchan Aruch doesn't deal with mezonos. Peiros, as much as you want. Pas ad kebeitza. Kesef Mishnah, Perek Vav Halacha Daled, and the Rambam Hilchos Tefillah says, pas, not at all. Pas is prohibited. And the Kesef Mishnah differentiates between achilas aray and te'ima. Only te'ima is mutar. Pas kezayis is achilas aray. It's not achilas kva, but according to Kesef Mishnah, achilas aray is also. Dogel Mavon on the spot says, obviously, he retracted in Shulchan Aruch because the Kesef Mishnah is the B'Yosef. It's the same Achab as the Shulchan Aruch. So he retracted, and he was more makel in Shulchan Aruch. And all the other Achronim say the same. So according to the Kesef Mishnah, pas, no. But the Shulchan Aruch says pas, yes. Also agreed upon by the Mishnah Brura. Magen Avraham says, b'mukim tzoyrech godol. The Beis Maya totally rejects the kula of te'ima. He doesn't go against the Shulchan Aruch. But he says the Shulchan Aruch that says te'ima is permissible is by Tfilas Mincha, which is a mitzvah derabanan. But a mitzvah d'oraisa, even te'ima, would be out. So according to the Beis Maya, there is no heter to eat before Tkiyas Shofar first day Rosh Hashanah. No heter. But the Beis Maya is a yochid. And all the others are matter te'ima before Tkiyas Shofar. There's some Sefer, the Beis Ephraim, the Akiva Eiger, and many, many others. And then the question would be, would it be better to eat after Tkiyas the Miyushav, like the Akiva Eiger, or like all the others before Tkiyas Shofar? Eishel Avrom, the B'chot Sharov, Simentov Kuf Peites, says the same as the Bekiva Eiger. If one needs to eat, it should be between Tkiyas de Miyushav and Tkiyas de Ma'umad. What's their reasoning? Shulchan Aruch clearly says one should not be mafsik between the brocha and Tkiyas de Miyushav till we end all the Tkiyas. Because Tkiyas de Ma'umad in Chazor Seshatz is Tekonas Chazal. Malchi Zechroinoi Shoifrois. So when we make the bracha, even though we're yoitzu with Tkiyas de Miyushav, or the first set of Tkiyas, but we want to patter also the other Tkiyas, whether it's Lachash or Chazoras Hashatz, different minhagim, Sfarad and Ashkenaz. So this is the Shulchan Aruch. However, Rabbi Kiva says, Rabbi Kiva Eiger maintains, it's not ma'akev. And the Isser to eat before Tkiyas Shofar is the Isser Gamo, which is a bit strange, because Rabbi Kiva Eiger deals with days of an epidemic. But still, his heter is across the board. And he says, anybody that feels any chulsha, lav dafke choylem. And that is why he says, there's no real heter to eat before Tkiyas Shofar. Would that be defined as a tzorech godol, according to the Mogen Avraham? And therefore, he prefers between Tkiyas de Mum and Tkiyas de Miyushav. So the Eshel Avraham was a contemporary of Rabbi Kiva Eiger, feels the same as Rabbi Kiva Eiger. Shalas Tshuvis Gvuros Eliyahu, Rabbi Yosef Eliyahu Henkin. Rav Henkin was the Gadol of America until the Igros Moshe came up and he overshadowed everyone else. But Rav Henkin was an amazing Gadol, and he was the leader of Torah Jewry in America in those days. I think he passed away Tov Shin Lamed Gimel, and that was more than 50 years ago. And in his Shuvis, Kuf Nuntes, Kuf Samach, first of all, Rav Henkin writes very harshly against the minhag of yeshivas that eat before Tkiyas Shofar. And he says, who gave them a heter to eat before Tkiyas Shofar? It's a Isser Gomer. And if it's hard for them they get hungry, they should be makatza and tefillah. You don't need to be mara so much in tefillah. Better daven shorter and eat your Yom Tov meal. He's very much against eating before Tkiyas Shofar. And he writes, if you do want to eat between Tkiyas de Miyushav and Tkiyas de Muhammad, I don't even think he quotes Rabbi Kiva Eiger. He writes on his own. He quotes neither the Eshel Avraham nor Rabbi Kiva Eiger, but he feels the same. His argument is the Issa to be mafsik between Miyushav and Ma'umad is not in the Gemara, it's in the Rishonim, but the Issa to eat before Tkiyas Shofar is the Mishnah. And I say, doesn't matter when a halacha was born. Chronology doesn't mean anything. The Issa to eat before Tkiyas Shofar, the Shulchan Aruch says, Te'ima is mutar. Te'ima means even bread at kebeitza. The Aruch HaShulchan says, Mezonis is confined as Te'ima. And if the minhag is to daven long Rosh Hashanah, that's what we should do. Because Rosh Hashanah is not just any other day. We have so much to ask for Rosh Hashanah, and so much to praise, and Malchi Zechon Shofars. Not to belittle the minhag to be Marach B'Tfilah Rosh Hashanah, and if we are Marach B'Tfilah, it's a Tzorech Godel. Tzorech Godel, people shouldn't be hungry, their kavanah should not be diminished, and when you are extremely hungry, it's hard to be Machaven, and therefore, Hanach Lebnei Yisrael, Em Lo Nevi'im Ebeni Nevi'im. I know of no kehillah in which they make kiddush and eat between Tkiyas de Miyushav and Tkiyas de Muhammad. Minhag Oilam is to make kiddush and eat before Tkiyas Shofar, and that is the right thing to do. Lo ke Rabbi Kiva Eiger, lo ke Eshel Avraham, and I don't think Rav Henkin is right. So Kuf Samach is a letter that Ramot Gifter, the Rosh Yeshiva tells, wrote to Rav Henkin. He was many years younger than Rav Henkin, but he challenged him. And he wrote to him, you are coming against all the great Rosh Hashivas of yore. And he writes, I learned in Telz, and the greater yeshivas, that was the minhag in our yeshiva. And that was the minhag in Slobodka. So how could you come out against all those great Rosh Yeshivas? And I wonder about Rav Gifter's letter. Is that your problem? The Rosh Yeshiva and Telz and Slobodka? I quoted the some Sefer, the Beis Ephraim, that Shara Tshuva, all the Gedolim going back 200 years. True, they were neither in Telz or Slobodka, but they still knew how to learn. And they all write that the minhag was to make Kiddush before Tkiyas Shofar, and that is minhag olam. But Rav Gifter is right. It was the minhag in all the major yeshivas as well. And Rav Gifter has another comment, and he says, you know, my dear Rebbe, Kvoid Hagoin, Rav Henkin, all the Reform guys, the conservative guys, and many modern Jews are always out to attack the yeshivas. And you're giving them ammo, you're giving them ammunition. If one of the greatest Gedolim comes out against the minhag of yeshivas, aren't you afraid that this might in a way cause a chilul Hashem and give justification to those that are always attacking our yeshivas? But Rav Henkin did not back down. And he writes to Rav Gifter, this is halacha, and we need to say halacha, and ani al mishmarti amoidu, and this minhag is wrong. Which is a very interesting discussion. And I say, the minhag definitely has justification. And it is a minhag, a broadly accepted minhag, and it is based on the concept of te'ima. In my shiur, there is no tune, there is no kugel. I definitely think it's wrong to have a feast before Tkiyas Shofar. It's hard to be machaven when you're very hungry. I think it's even harder to be machaven after chunt and lakshan kigel and kartoffel kigel and after. So in my shul, we have some cookies and some cake, and that's it. I'm not a young man, and I told you my children are always annoyed when I say I'm an old man. I, Baruch Hashem, never ate before Tkiyas Shofar. And I don't feel a need. You know, I drink a coffee, maybe another cup of coffee, and I feel well, I don't eat. So, but in my shul, I do allow, because so many people feel a need. So we have cake, we have cookies, we make Kiddush, and my minhag is, I listen to Kiddush, and I also drink a Revius Mitzvah Novim, because that is another discussion. Could you be Yotze Kiddush when by the Mekadosh it's Kiddush b'Mokom Suda, but not by you? And the Mishnah Rule Paskins in Reisha and Gimel, no. If you want to be Yotze, that it needs to be Kiddush b'Mokom Suda by you. So if I want to drink a coffee, you cannot drink a coffee before Kiddush. So I also drink a Revius of grape juice. So I'm Yotze Kiddush and I drink a coffee. But the minhag to eat before Tkiyas Shofar is the right minhag. If you don't need to, then don't. Because fundamentally it's an issur to eat before Tkiyas Shofar, and the heter is only b'mokum tzorech. According to the Magen Rom, tzorech gadol. Do you need to make Kiddush if you eat before Tkiyas Shofar, which is a separate discussion. And in some Hasidic chatzeres, they eat without Kiddush before Tkiyas Shofar. Why? What would be the heter? 3 different explanations. One is a Hasidic approach. Some Sforim bring this in the name of the very first Belzer Rav. Who knows who was the first Belzer Rebbe? Sar Shalom. Did anybody hear about Reb Shayel and Mekarastir? Who didn't? Many people never heard about the Baal Shem Tov, but they heard about Reb Shayel. His kever surpassed Reb Melech Menezhensk. It's the most popular kever in the world, I think. Reb Shayel had a son-in-law who was a big Talmid Chochem. His name was Agon Rabbi Orlando, and he wrote a Sefer Shal Shuvas Beis Yisrael. And a Siman Aleph, he brings this same svara in the name of the Shinavarav. Do you know who was the Shinavarav? Son of the Divrei Chaim. So after all these introductions and all these Rabbeim, what do they say? Rosh Hashanah Lamed Beis, the Gemara says that originally Tkiya Shofar was in Shachris, because Rizim Madim and Mitzvahs. So these Madim and Mitzvahs would dictate that this magnificent mitzvah, this huge mitzvah, we should do as early as possible. Mishum Gzeres Malchus, it was pushed off to Musaf. The Gzera was the authorities decreed against Tkiyas Shofar. And the inspectors came to check out shuls. It's interesting. They weren't troubled by davening, so what do they have against Tkiyas Shofar? Tkiyas Shofar, the Gemara says, La'arbe v'sasoton. Tais explains Shonat Zayin. What's the story about the Arbe v'sasoton? When the Sultan hears Shofar, he's extremely agitated and annoyed because he thinks it's the Shofar of Mashiach. And he's finished. Maybe the Goyim had that same concern. So they didn't care about our davening, but the decree was against Shofar. And they knew that Jews daven early in the morning. So by 10, 11 o'clock, all the inspectors went home, and that is when they blew Shofar, by Musaf. So the Belzerov and the Shinavarov argued, Tkiyas the Miyushav are part of Shachas. Tkiyas the Ma'umad are Chazor Shashatz of Musaf. You can't say that belongs to Shachas. But Tkiyas the Miyushav is before Musaf, and originally Tkiyas belonged to Shachas. So we assumed Tkiyas the Miyushav is part of Shachas. As long as you didn't finish Shachas, you're not Chayiv in Kiddush. Fascinating Svara. Interesting. They don't really make sense. Whenever we speak about tefillah, the definition of tefillah is tefillah ha'amida. It's the Shmoynes. When you finished tefillah ha'amida of Shachris, that's the end of tefillah Shachris. So unreasonable that here's the Miyushav that come after Kriyas HaTorah are part of Shachris. Not reasonable. The Maharshal's opinion is you're not chayiv in Kiddush till after Musaf. And the Maharshal is quoted in many sources. Be'er Heitev Peiter Sivkot Yud Beis. The Maharsham was the greatest bookie of his age, and he always brings sources that nobody else brings. So the Magen Avraham, Reish Pei Vav, is choylek on the Maharshal, and the Magen Avraham says right after Shachris you're chayiv in Kiddush. The Masham, there on the spot, Naresh Ayinvov, quotes a sefer that Maru Segal went to visit the Marsho. It was before Musaf, and they both ate without Kiddush. So the Marsho's opinion was like the Marshal. And the Masham writes, B'shas Chak, we could rely on the Marshal. But why would this be considered Shas Chak? If you're going to eat, you might as well drink a Revius and make Kiddush. What's your problem? Why would this be defined as Shas Chak? And we do paskin in accordance to the Magen Avraham and the Bach that before Musaf you need to make Kiddush. Approach number three is Maharamash. I'm a descendant of the Maharamash. Gdol Talmidei HaChasam Sofer. And whenever I quote the Maharamash and I say he was the greatest Talmud of the Chasam Sofer, sometimes people ask me, who are you to decide who was the greatest Talmud of the Chasam Sofer? Is that because he's your Zayda? So you crowned him as the Chasam Sofer has so many Gedolim, Talmidim, so many. You know, the Maram Shik, the Ksav Sofer, Yad Eliezer, and many others. But the Ksav Sofer has a hesped on Rameir Eisenstadt, the Maramash, and the Ksav Sofer says, he was my father's greatest disciple. So it's not me. Sefer Zichron Yehuda, the Minhagim of Maharamash, and he says, Choyves Kiddush is when you are mutar lechol. Kiddush is Kiddush Makam Suda. There can't be a Chiyuv of Kiddush if there's an Isser to eat. Then how could you make Kiddush Makam Suda? So the Zman Chiyuv of Kiddush is the Zman Heter Achila. And if it's an isser to eat before Tkiyah Shofar, there could be no Chiyuv Kiddush before Tkiyah Shofar. Because how could there be a Chiyuv Kiddush if you can't eat? Kiddush needs to be b'mukim suda. So the reason we say after Shachas there's a Chiyuv Kiddush because you can eat before Musaf. But if you can't eat before Tkiyah Shofar, these two Zmanim are one. Zman Heter Achil and Zman Chiyuv Kiddush can be different. That's a powerful argument. And that is the Maramash. But nevertheless, the minhag is we do make Kiddush before we eat before Tkiyah Shofar. And the reasoning probably is, Reish Pei Vav Siv Gimel, the Shulchan Aruch says, before Misaf, Te'ima Muteres. The Mogan Avraham says, before Tkiyah Shofar, only b'mukim tzorech godol, and that's the difference. But upon Musaf, you're allowed to eat. Can't eat a Suda, but Te'ima Muteres, even Shelo b'shas adchak. You don't need a tzorech godol. So before Musaf, you're allowed to eat, so you have a Chiyuv Kiddush. Before Tkiyah Shofar, fundamentally, eating is prohibited. We're matabo mukum tzorech godol, and therefore the Maramash might be right that, no, to the contrary, that would be a steal. That would be the yishuv of minhag olam. Before Kiddush, no. If te'im is mutar, then that is why we make Kiddush. The Maramash would answer, no. Before Musaf, you need to make Kiddush, but before Tkiyah Shofar, not. Our minhag is based on the heter of Te'ima before Tkiyah Shofar. Even though the Mogan Avraham would say, only b'mukim tzorech godol. So today we discussed the fundamental question. As I said, there is negeya, almost in every shul in the world, eating before Tkiyah Shofar. If you don't need to eat, then don't. But many people feel not eating till 2 in the afternoon, or some shuls finish after 2, and some people feel that if they don't eat, they're going to be hungry, they won't have proper kavanah, and in that case, you definitely could eat. So we discussed Tkiyah Shofar last week, Tkiyah and Shmiyah. Besides Tkiyah and Shmiyah, Tkiyah Shofar is fundamentally based on 2 different types of blasts, Tkiyah and Truah. The Torah speaks only of Truah. Yom Truah Yiyeh Lochem. Yom Zichron Truah. But the Gemara learns that every Truah comes with a Tkiyah Lefaneo and a Tkiyah La'achareo. What is the difference between Tkiyah and Truah? Tkiyah is a voice of simcha and confidence. Truah is a voice that expresses shivroin leiv. And we learn this from the mitzvah of Chatzotzes and Pashas Baloischa. Uveyom simchaschem uvemoyadeichem uverosh echadshechem utekatem bechatzotzrot. V'hoyo kisevoich mechama al artzachem v'hara oisem. So from the Chatzotzes we learn Tkiyah conveys simcha. Truah conveys brokenheartedness, daga, worry, concern. Both are relevant to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is a day that is somewhat confusing. How does one have to feel Rosh Hashanah? On one hand, the Navi says, Yichlu madanim, shtu mamtakim, shilchom monois le'einochan loy. Al tiyotzvu, don't be sad. Chedves Hashem hi ma'uzchem. It's a Yom Simcha. And the Tur famously quotes the Medrash, B'noyek shebeyolam, when a person has a very tough day of judgment, a very tough court case, and he's very worried. Loi v'shchoirim, u'misatev b'shchoirim, ve'enoi mistaper. We are different. Loi v'shlevonim, u'misatev b'levonim, u'mistaper. We are confident. שהקדוש ברוך הוא יעשה לנו נס, which is an interesting expression. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will make a miracle and he'll forgive us. A miracle and he'll forgive. Sometimes forgiveness requires a miracle. We don't deserve to be forgiven. But when we ask to be forgiven, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will forgive. And many times I say, nobody twists HaKadosh Baruch Hu's arms, not even the Rambam. No one. No one dictates to HaKadosh Baruch Hu what he does. There's an amazing Yerushalmi in Sanhedrin. The Yerushalmi says, Ein shechacho lefnei kisei kvoidecha, bishvil Yisroel nase shachachan. Noisa ovoin va'oiver al pesha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks the other way. There is no forgetfulness by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But when he wants, he forgets. So that is a philosophical calisthenics. Somebody once asked, could HaKadosh Baruch Hu forget something? To forget is a chesaron. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no chesaron. But is there anything HaKadosh Baruch Hu can do? If you say there's anything HaKadosh Baruch Hu can do, you're matal doifi and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He can do everything. Could he forget? The answer is in the Yerushalmi. When he wants, he forgets. When does he want to forget? Sometimes he wants to forget our Vedas. And that same Yerushalmi says, there's a scale up in the heavens. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu weighs mitzvahs keneged averos. And sometimes the scale is tipping in the wrong direction. And we have far more avedas than mitzvahs. What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? He adds on the other side of the scale, the mitzvah side, he adds some of his own mitzvahs up there in the heavens. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a lot of mitzvahs. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not always fair. And whenever he is unfair, it is always to our benefit. Noise oven va'over al pesha. We need to know how to invoke his rachamim. Tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah. So coming back, on one hand, Rosh Hashanah is a day of simcha. We're confident that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will make an S and I'll forgive. Sometimes forgiving demands a miracle. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu will do these miracles. Tkiya conveys simcha. There are two reasons to be happy on Rosh Hashanah. One reason is it's the coronation day of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We king him. We declare his kingship. We are makabel ol malchus shemayim, like Reb Saadia Gaon writes in the very first time of Tkiyas Shofar. The other reason is we're confident that he will forgive us. And I say that two tkiyas, before and after, reflect these two different reasons of simcha. First and foremost, even before the Truah, we're happy because HaKadosh Baruch Hu was happy. We're happy to be Avdei Hashem. We're happy to be Mamlech HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We pay a very steep price for the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is our king. All the others just have Sheva mitzvahs, which ultimately boil down to be a mensch, nothing more. Be a mensch. Don't kill, don't rob, don't adultery, idolatry, don't be Ovid Avizot, don't be a Noyev, just be a mensch. We have Taryag, no free moment in our entire life. 24/7, 365 days, machshove dibba v'maisa. And nevertheless, we're happy to be as avodim. And we're happy to be bonav shel Elokeinu. The tkiya after the Truah is, yes, we acknowledge, we're worried. We're worried because it's a Yom of Mishpat. Everyone, Yavon lefanechu kebnei moroin, miyichye v'miyomes. We are worried, but we believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be moichel avonos. That's at tkiya lefanei and tkiya lachrayo. But fundamentally, and this is what I feel, the ikar mitzvah is the Truah. Yom Truah Yeh Elochem. The two tkiyas supplement the truah. Lefoneo va'achareo. So the overriding and the underlying feeling Rosh Hashanah is Emas Yoim Adin, more than Simcha. The Simcha accompanies. The Simcha is malava, the truah. But after all, what the Torah speaks about is Yom Truah Yehi Yerochem. Chazal teach us the tkiyas supplement the truah. Tkiyah lefoneo. And that's one aspect of Simcha of Rosh Hashanah. Chedvas Hashem hi ma'uzchem. And the other tkiyah, which comes after the truah, is, yes, we are worried. We acknowledge our shortcomings and our failures, but we still believe we will do what we have to do. We be mishtadel and tshuva. Ki lo achpoitz b'mois hameis, kiyem b'shuvoi midrocha v'chai. We believe HaKadosh Baruch Hu yasar l'neis, and He will forgive. So, this is the way we prepare for Rosh Hashanah in Chodesh Elul. So, Be'ez Hashem, I hope we'll have a shiur next Sunday night, right before Rosh Hashanah, b'siyata d'shmaya, and maybe it'll be a somewhat shorter shiur because there are so many shiurim now these days before Rosh Hashanah. But as of now, you should all have a ksiva v'chasima toiva together with Kol Beis Yisrael. We should share b'soides toivas, tichel shona v'kiloloiseu, tochel shona v'berchoseu, and let us hope that this coming year will be a shnas geula v'yeshua b'mheiro v'yomeinu. Amen.